Welcome to a Wednesday evening with Clear Mountain. We're here today with Leigh Brasington. Leigh, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, a brief introduction for those who don't know. Leigh Brasington has been practicing meditation since 1985 and is the senior American student of the late Venerable Ayya Khema. Leigh began assisting Venerable Ayya Khema in 1994 and began teaching retreats on his own in 1997. He is also authorized to teach by Jack Kornfield. Leigh has taught the Jhanas along with multiple insight practices at over 150 residential retreats throughout the United States and Europe. He is the author of the books Right Concentration, A Practical Guide to the Jhanas, and Dependent Origination and Emptiness, Streams of Dependently Arisen Processes Interacting. And Leigh, I first just want to express our appreciation for you being part of this first wave of Dhamma teachers, which has really cultivated the ground, which we find ourselves stepping into up here in the West Coast and in Seattle. So anumodana for the good work you've done.
Well, thank you. I think of myself as in the second wave. There was Joseph and Sharon and so forth, and they all got there when I was still being an ethical hedonist. That was my spiritual practice after I got to college until I was 35 years old and encountered the Dharma.
You might have other viewers on this who would be able to identify with periods of their life with that term as well. So maybe a first question, Leigh, would be, there are a lot of perspectives on what constitutes jhana, from the full-bodied awareness, such as that taught to by Tanpur, or pointed out by Tanpur Leigh, Longpo Suchito, or Tanajan Thanissaro, or a more one-pointed focus, such as taught in the Visuddhimagga or the Pa'ak tradition. And I'm curious what your interpretation of jhana is, or Ayya Khema's. How do you interpret that term?
So I interpret that term as 8 altered states of consciousness that are brought on by concentration and yield even more concentration, with each of the 8 states being specifically defined in the suttas. I actually have on my website an essay on interpretations of the jhanas. And so there are the Visuddhimagga interpretations. That's Tanjeff's phrase, Visuddhimagga jhanas versus Sutta jhanas. And that would include Pao-Alk and his students, Tina Rasmussen, Steve Steiner, Marcia Rose, Shaila Catherine. There's Ajahn Brahmavamso outside of Perth, Australia. He teaches, again, very similar to what's described in the Visuddhimagga. He claims he's never read the Visuddhimagga, but what he's teaching sounds very much like what I heard from Venerable Pao-Alk. And then there are people who are teaching what Tanjeff called sutta-style jhanas. This would include Christina Feldman. Her understanding is deeper concentration than either Ayya or Ayya Khema wanted. And I guess the next in that tier would be Ayya Khema and myself. I think Ayya wanted more concentration in the 4th jhana and less in the 1st than I. I want a little more in the 1st, and I'll settle for less in the 4th. But it's definitely still very much one-pointed. Okay, and there is no full body awareness because the full body is more than one point. And then there's Shamatha Trust, which I think is closer to Ayya Khema's understanding. There's Bhante Gunaratna, where I'm not quite sure what he's saying. He wants the nimitta, but he also wants to do insight practice in the jhana, which would mean a lesser degree of concentration. And that would also be Thanissaro Bhikkhu and Rob Burbea wanting to do insight practice in the jhanas. There's IMS, Insight Meditation Society, and they'll teach people the jhanas using metta, and this is sometimes taught at Spirit Rock, both only on the long courses, the 6-week, month-long, 2-month, 3-month courses. And then finally there's Bhante Vimalaramsi, who passed away couple of years ago now, I think, who teaches such light states that I wouldn't say. So also on my website, I have a list of 46 different mind states that go by the name Jhana. And I actually included Bhante Vimalaramsi's 8 jhanas as different from the Sutta jhanas or the Abhidhamma jhanas or the Visuddhimagga jhanas.
I appreciate you being so explicit about what your view of what these different teachers are teaching, and yes, big deep dive right off the bat. I am curious. You're using your use of the word one-pointed. I mean, I think it was in Right Concentration where you actually take exception to that word as, I mean, the whole concept of the 5 jhanangas, the 5 limbs of jhana. You make I think a good point that single pointedness, this ekaggata, is actually not in that list. So when you said just now that like jhana couldn't be done with the whole body because that's not one pointed, what did you mean by that?
Okay, from my own experience, it's easier for people to learn what I'm teaching if they'll generate what I call access concentration. Again, not a term from the Suttas, stolen from the Visuddhimagga, redefined, but meaning you're with the object of meditation like the breath or metta or body scan and not falling into distraction. So to generate access concentration, it seems to work better if you're doing it focusing on one thing at a time rather than trying to do whole body awareness. That the degree of concentration that I'm looking for just doesn't really show up very easily for people doing whole body awareness. It's possible. I do get students who actually sound like they're getting into the jhanas I'm teaching, going with whole body awareness. But I also get students who are clinging to their whole body awareness rather than trying the one point and not getting into the jhanas. So yes, the word one-pointedness does not occur in the suttas in conjunction with the first jhana, except in 2 very late suttas. But I think to get to the jhanas, to generate that concentration, you're going to want to work with some one-pointedness. And then what I say is switch your attention to some pamoja, a pleasant sensation like the smile or the warm tingly glow in your hands, and be one-pointedly focused on that. And then the piti and hopefully the sukha will arise and you'll find yourself in the first jhana. And there's still background thinking there. So, yeah, I mean, it's thinking of, wow, this is intense. How long do I need to stay here? Should I move on? As opposed to when I get to Hawaii, I'm going to first thing go, whatever. So, yeah, it's not totally focused on one thing. It's really one-pointed on the experience of piti sukha, because you can't really tell the difference when you're first getting into the first jhana. And then in the second jhana, there is unification of mind mentioned, and that's when the mind really coalesces into one point of being non-distracted about the various jhana factors. Does that help?
Yeah, certainly. And this is a topic where different people have very opinions that the jhana wars, it's called in some circles. But I do appreciate you not only laying out the landscape, and there's a brilliant book called The Experience of Samadhi by Richard Shankman, I think, that goes into the 2.
And into Leigh's.
Oh,
it mentions Leigh's.
Oh, yeah, Leigh, you're in there, I believe. Then,
yes.
And there you go. I do appreciate you taking us through the process, that just what this term means in terms of how you direct people towards concentration, because I think that practical direction is what is meaningful to people most of all. So as you said in some of your essays about entering first jhana, you speak about really focusing in on your primary object, such as the breath, and then the switch, as you noted, to that sensation of piti or pamoja, or pleasant feeling in the body. And then I think you say the hard part then is to stay there and do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I am curious, first, how hard is it, do you see, for people to access what you're referring to as first jhana in daily life? Does it require a long retreat for most people? And second, where do people get hung up, and how do you usually usher them through that kind of boundary.
Right. So the second question, so I'm a computer programmer. I'm really good at one-pointed. I can't multitask at all. So I can remember the second question.
One at a time. That's great.
All right. So the second question, when you sent me the email before the start of the retreat, which I have, where did I put it? I lost it.
I can post the question.
Here it is. Here it is, I think. No, I don't. Now I can't see the email. Oh, yeah, no. Anyhow, you detailed out all of the various steps along the way, and it can go wrong in every single one of those steps. And it has gone wrong multiple times in every single one of those steps along the way. The most common problem is that people jump too soon from what they think is access concentration into the pamoja. Right? They're not really at access concentration. They followed 5 breaths in a row. This has got to be it. And I've got some pleasant feeling. Or maybe just the pleasant feeling shows up and they jump on it. So they're not building access concentration strong enough to actually have the capacity when you switch to the pamoja, the pleasant feeling, to be able to stay focused on it. The breath is actually quite interesting because it comes, it goes, it's different, it's something going on. We much more easily notice change than something that's not changing. When you switch to the pleasant sensation, it's not changing and there's nothing going on except it's mildly pleasant. So you need a lot of good concentration to be able to stay with it. You're trying to set up a positive feedback loop of pleasure. And if you get distracted, it's not going to work. But if you can stay focused on the pleasure and really enjoy it, the enjoyment, that's a little more pleasure. Now you've got a little more. The fact that you've got a little more, that's even more. And it erupts eventually into piti. So that's the place where it goes wrong the most often. It can go wrong by somebody getting to access concentration and thinking not good enough and staying there past the point of diminishing returns. So as always, middle way. It can go wrong with people having psychological stuff that's unresolved coming up. This is really common. It's so common that I warn people about this at the start of every retreat I teach. Your stuff might come up. It can come up with people having expectations. Expectations is the worst thing you can bring on any retreat. I tell people just follow the instructions and don't worry about where they're supposed to go. If you follow the instructions, and I do a good enough job of explaining, and you do a good enough job of following, you'll wind up there without ever even knowing where it's supposed to go. And again, I have to warn people at the start of every retreat on this one. So yeah, the method can go wrong pretty much anywhere. It can go wrong when the piti starts to come because people feel like it's going out of control. That's because it's going out of control. You have to let go into the experience. And so some people get there, but when the piti starts feeling like it's going out of control, they pull back. The good news is if they'll keep approaching it, they'll get a little further each time until they get into the full-blown jhana. And it's like, it's fine here. And then the problem is cured.
Leigh, you have a number of specific translations that you like for some of these terms that we're discussing, like for samadhi, which most often translated as concentration. You point out that, for a lot of Americans, or a lot of Westerners, the connotations of that is just, it gives you a headache just thinking about it. So you use the word indistractibility. I'm curious if you could speak more. What is the nuance that you're trying to pull out by using the word indistractible for concentration, and how does one gauge if one is indistractible enough? Yeah. Say for the first jhana. Yeah.
Right. So concentration, like you said, has this furrowed brow, working too hard thing. So I was looking for another word that more clearly describes what we're after, and we're after the ability to not become distracted. And so access concentration, which would be access indistractibility, that you have enough focus on your one-pointed object like the breath that you aren't going to become distracted. There might be some still wispy background thoughts like, oh, this is pretty good. Is this what he was talking about? That sort of thing, as opposed to planning your trip to Hawaii or whatever. And so the idea behind the access concentration is get to the point where you don't become distracted. So when you switch to the pamoja, the pleasant sensation, you don't become distracted. When you get into the jhanas, you don't become distracted. When you do your insight practice post-jhana, you're less likely to become distracted. That, coupled with the suppression of your usual ego creation that takes place as you move through the jhanas, gives you a chance to undistractedly examine reality from a less egocentric perspective. That's just a much better way to gain insight.
So Leigh, to really quickly reverse, I found the passage I emailed you, that quoting you about the entering into first jhana. So to summarize, the method for entering the first jhana: you sit in a nice, comfortable, upright position and generate access concentration by putting and maintaining your attention on a single meditation object. When access concentration arises, then you shift your attention from breath, or whatever your method is, to a pleasant sensation, preferably a pleasant physical sensation. You put your attention on that sensation and maintain your attention on that sensation and do nothing else. So to kind of point at a few things there. One is, how long do you recommend people stay in that? When is the access concentration good enough? And that switch to that sense of well-being or pleasure in the body, can you give us a little more, like, flesh that movement out a little bit? Like, where would people usually find that sense of pleasure? How would they know they were focusing on the right thing, etc.?
Yeah. So finding a sense of pleasure is one of the challenges. There are people who are dysthymic and they just don't have any pleasure, no physical pleasure. And I tell them, well, you'll need to find some mental pleasure, and they don't know what mental pleasure is. Now, those people, I feel so sorry for them. They're really hard to help. When you're at the access concentration long enough, and I say 5 to 10 to 15 minutes, because when you're there, your sense of time is messed up, and it's going to vary from person to person. Some people can get there in 3 minutes. 3 minutes in access is good enough to learn the jhana. Other people are going to take the 15 minutes, and maybe it's good enough. So it varies so immensely that I give the very indefinite 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. And then it's find a pleasant sensation. The most common one is in the hands, a sort of a warm, tingly glow, and you just enjoy the pleasantness. I use the smile, and that works really, really well for people that like using the smile. That there are too many people in this culture have been told, smile whether you feel like it or not. And here's this old white guy telling you, smile whether you feel like it or not. And so they're not going to smile. So they have to find something else. The smile works for about 20 to 25% of the students I work with. The majority use the hands. People have reported third eye. That's not uncommon. Top of the head, top of the shoulders, soles of the feet. Actually, you name a body part, somebody's found pleasure there that they could focus on and write it into the first jhana. For those who can't find a physical source of pleasure, then they'll have to find a mental source. The one I recommend is metta. If someone likes doing metta, all right, you've gotten to access with the breath. Okay, switch to doing metta for the people you really like to do metta for. That may be pleasant enough to take you in. Let go of the doing of the metta and just focus on the feeling. If you can get to that, it has a good chance of taking you in. If they can't find a physical pleasantness. They don't like doing metta, then it's getting tough. They're going to need to find some stable mental pleasantness, such as a memory of something your child did or your pet did that was really cute. Something like that, something that brings a smile to your face, and that the feeling will sustain without you having to start telling a story to yourself about it. And that's tricky, but it's possible to get in that way as well if the access concentration is deep enough.
Leigh, so far we've mostly been talking about the first jhana, but in your book and in your teachings, you do talk about all 8 jhanas, going up through the 4 material and then to the immaterial jhanas. In the tradition that we came from, the Thai forest tradition, there's much less emphasis. Well, there's just less emphasis on naming the jhanas. So Ajahn Thanissaro has written what I found is a really compelling article called Jhana Not by the Numbers, in which he talks about his teacher, Ajahn Fuang, his teaching, which was, he would talk about the qualities, those jhanangas, the limbs of jhana. Is there directed thought? And he's using that directed thought evaluation. Is there piti and sukha, one-pointedness, but not necessarily labeling, okay, this is first jhana, this is second jhana, etc. Seeing the drawback in that is that people get focused on it, especially people who are really achievement driven, and it can actually ruin a retreat. I know you mentioned that the first thing you teach people on a jhana retreat is not to have expectations, but I think it's easy to fall into, if someone you've got this goal, it's a very clear number, and someone will tell me if I have it. What do you find to be the advantages of using the numbers so explicitly?
The advantage of using the numbers explicitly is you know where you are, and therefore you know what to do to get to the next state. Okay, so you're in the second jhana. The piti has calmed down. It's more in the background. The sukha's in the foreground. All right. That's fairly definitive. I mean, top of your head's no longer blowing off, but you might still be rocking a little bit because you got some piti there and you're happy. All right. Now, where do you find the third jhana? Well, the piti is gone in the description, and there's still some sukha. All right. So if you know you're in the second, and you know that the bodily feeling of the second is higher than the third, so you're going to go down. So it helps when you make the transition to take a deep breath, let the energy out, because that will give you a sense of coming down. It will also tend to calm the piti and turn down the energy level on the sukha to more like contentment or satisfaction. And so now you've got very distinct things to move. All right, you get to the third, and it's your first time there, and it's a little wobbly, and you fall out. What do you do to get back? Well, you remember the second jhana, and you might be able to step directly back into it. Little piti comes up. All right, and now you take the breath again and go back to the third. It's often, if you fall out of a jhana, easier to go back to the previous one. I've used this multiple times. I've been in jhana 4, fallen out. It's like, okay, I can't get back to 4, but I know where 3 is. And so by having a very distinct feeling of what each jhana is, I can target my mind to get back to the one that I need to get back to reestablish the depth of concentration.
What do you think about, so in tandem with this teaching about not using jhana by the numbers, there's often this instruction that, okay, use any of these limbs of jhana, or if you want to use the numbers, have like a mental label, like a post-it note, rather than, okay, this is first jhana, this is absolutely piti, this is sukha, this is the second jhana, etc. It's like, okay, this feels like is what I've experienced in my life as a human. Okay, this post-it note here, this is piti, this is jhana, first jhana, etc. What do you think about that? Is holding these provisionally?
I'd never really given it any thought before we start talking about it.
Hmm.
But my immediate reaction is no, I want clear, definitive mind states. I don't see them as discontinuous. I don't see it as stair steps going down. I see if this is the first jhana, there's a slope and then there's another plateau. And there's another slope and another plateau. And then from third jhana, there's a steeper slope, and again, eventually a plateau down there.
Hmm.
So for me, I'm finding these plateaus, and when I hit the plateau, that's when it's the most stable. So the stability I'm looking for sort of puts it into a narrow range of possibilities, sitting on the plateau as opposed to on the slope somewhere. And by doing that, then I can stay there and deepen that state just by staying there and focusing on it so that I can get to the next jhana. So that's the advantage I find for having definitive states, is you definitively know where you are, and you definitively know how, once you're skilled at it, to tune yourself right to the center of that plateau. And it's easier to stay there and deepen your experience then.
Thank you, Leigh. And I kind of wanted to, before we go to audience questions, just divert the conversation a tad to another question which you singled out as of particular interest, and we're interested in it, is how do you go about speaking to the more esoteric or less commonly accepted elements of Buddhist thought and cosmology, including rebirth, devas, other realms, there's this world, there's another world, etc. How have you navigated speaking about those and thinking about them?
Right. So for multiple lifetimes, it's very simple. I don't know what happens when we die. I've heard lots of views and opinions. I've seen people presenting all sorts of evidence. And as someone with a science background, I haven't seen any evidence that convinces me anybody knows. All right. Yeah, like I say, I've heard lots of stories. Then I look in the suttas, and in some of the suttas, I find the Buddha teaching basically is you're actually asking the wrong question. Looking particularly at Katyayana Gota, the Samyutta 1215, this world for the most part depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence or the notion of non-existence. All right. So will I exist after I die? So I'm caught up in existence and non-existence. But the sutta goes on to say that the Buddha teaches the Dhamma via the middle, between the extremes of everything existing and nothing existing, that Dhamma via the middle is dependent origination. Couple that now with Majjhima 38, and I believe this is also found in Majjhima 4. I may have the wrong number, maybe it's 7 too. So the Buddha says, after discussing dependent origination with the monks, understanding in this way, would you run back to the past wondering, was I? What was I? What happened to me? No, Venerable Sir. Would you run to the future? No, Venerable Sir. Would you be perplexed about the present? No, Venerable Sir. Monks, are you saying this just because I'm your teacher? No, Venerable Sir. Are you saying it from your own experience? Yes, Venerable Sir. Good that you know it from your own experience. So with a deep enough experience of dependent origination, one stops conceiving of themselves existing now. And certainly not, if they're not existing now, they're not existing in the past, they won't exist in the future. They've stepped out of those categories. And so reaching that point, the question does not occur to you, what was I in the past? What will I be in the future? Just like the question doesn't occur to you, what happens if I fall off the edge of the world? Does it hurt? Well, the question doesn't occur because you understand the world is a sphere and there's no edge to fall off of. So, all right, that's where I go with multiple lifetimes.
Actually, can we pause there? Because maybe that's the most quintessential point in that whole landscape of, and so, centering in on that, I'm curious. I mean, I know the suttas you're referencing, and certainly the Buddha does praise not getting caught up in these proliferations of exactly what I will be. And he also pushes strongly against the idea of a concrete and non-changing vijnana or atman traveling life to life.
Right.
But also, of the 3 insight knowledges on the night of his awakening, 2 of them have to do with rebirth and karma. And it's woven so deeply into the sutta, even Paticca Samuppada, each link being explicitly defined as this, birth, age, and death in a multi-life perspective. So it does seem, what would you say to the kind of, to push on that a little bit, like it is something the Buddha really singled out as really important. And I'm curious if you've read the research of Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia and sort of the past life research of children and their memories.
So the way I would push back on the sutta, I haven't read Dr. Stevenson's thing. I have encountered other things over the years, very definitely. The way I would push back on the suttas with the remembering past lives and seeing beings passing away and re-arising according to their karma. For the remembering past lives, since I have a background in mathematics, I did the math. Right? The Buddha remembers 1 life, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000, many eons of world expansion and contraction, etc. All right, that's the first watch of the night, 4 hours. So I don't know numbers for eons, but I do know the number 100,000. Let's divide 100,000 into 4 hours. How much time did the Buddha have to remember each of his 100,000 lives? Turns out 1/7 of a second. And then the next 1/7 of a second, he's got to remember the next one. And it's not just that was life, that was life, that was, no, he's remembering name, clan, pleasure, pain, food. It's 7 different things. No. And you can't say he was the Buddha because that's not going to happen for 8 more hours, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think we should take it literally. There's a great paragraph or 2 in Stephen Batchelor's on Beyond Buddhism or something like that, After Buddhism, I think it's called, where he points out that what this points to is the fact that who you are has arisen from many things that have gone on in the past, different from this mind-body process that has made you who you are. And when you act in the present, this will, in some way, determine the unfolding of the future, situating each person not in a selfish, I'm out for my thing, but seeing themselves in this net of past causes and conditions coming to fruition here, this generating more causes and conditions, which will go on into the future. So that's how I would answer all of the suttas that talk about the Buddha's awakening like that. For the suttas, like in the gradual training, where this appears for the one who's following the gradual training, it doesn't appear in all of them. Okay, and I think it was added later. So that takes care of it there, right? And then it's also, I think, really important whenever looking at a sutta to look very carefully to whom is the Buddha speaking. Is he speaking to a venerable monk, like in Kaccayana Gotta? Is he speaking to a layperson, the king, a potter? Is he speaking to someone from another sect, a Jain, a Brahmin? He's going to say different things. He's not trying to do metaphysics. And that's a mistake a lot of people make. They're trying to interpret the Buddha's teachings as metaphysics. He's trying to get people to practice. And so he says one thing to a Jain and says something completely opposite to an eminent monk. So what I tell the students is forget about all the history and all that sort of stuff. Look at what the Buddha's telling you to do as your practice and go do that.
Yeah, thank you, Leigh. And it is so interesting to watch the mind want a view. And I mean, in that, watching my own mind is, going through each one of your instances. I mean, I was impressed. One of your recent talks, you're talking about a recent insight that you had into the just complete, I forget the word, the complete non-existence of time. So I love calculations, like, yeah, that it would be 1/7 of a second to memorize or to remember, all these different lifetimes. But I can't imagine a operating of time that would allow for processing, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's maybe not worth going more into, but we do have quite a few questions.
Right, I see that.
So we'll just put them up on the screen. So here's our first one. So Ayya Khema's use of visualizations for metta practice is very dear. Can you speak about her process? It feels like a beautiful, creative way to teach and share and express loving kindness.
Yeah. So she had a bunch of them that she had done before. And so after her Dharma talk, after the Q&A, we'd sit down and she would say, please put your attention on your breath for a few moments. And then she would start thinking, well, which one should I do tonight? Or maybe I should make up a new one. And so occasionally you would see her start to do one and change her mind into another. I remember on the retreat in 94, it was a month-long retreat almost. And one of them started out, and I was expecting one I'd heard before, but it turned out to be something different because she changed her mind just at that point. But yeah, she was highly visual. She used visual metaphors all the time. And I'm very visual, so I just connected immediately with this and the visualizing. And so she thought of various ways to help people visualize sending the metta. And yeah, it really worked for me. And when, 6, 7 years later, I encountered the metta phrases for the first time, I thought, boy, this is weird. I could do it, but the whole time I'm doing it, I'm visualizing the person and sending them metta as I'm saying the phrases. So I've always done the visualization part.
Thank you, Leigh. We have another question here. Would you mind asking, well, okay, I'll just ask, so the first question when we talked about the two-parter on jhana, is the first jhana something people can access in everyday life? And how much retreat would one have to get for that to occur?
So there's two things for taking the jhanas home. Most people have to learn them on a retreat. Okay, there are people who learn them at home, apparently, from what they're writing to me if they email or if we talk on Zoom, seems like they're getting there. I stumbled into the first jhana on my second retreat. It's just they're not impossible. The Buddha stumbled into the first jhana under the rose apple tree. So the two things that are necessary is how well do you know the jhanas and how good your daily practice. So if you touch jhana number 3 once during the retreat, yeah, you're not going to take it home with you. But if you got to jhana 3 on a regular basis, a couple of times every day for the last half of the retreat, yeah, you got a good chance. You would get into it almost every sitting every day for the last half of the retreat, you got a good chance if your daily practice is good enough. Ayya Khema said an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening every day. And I think she's correct. It's going to take that much to keep them there all the time. That was not what I managed to do, though. I could do an hour in the morning, and then maybe a couple nights a week I'd go sit with a group, and it was always better when I got that second sitting in. All right. So if you do an hour a day, let's say 30 out of 31 days, then you'll be able to keep them, if you know them well, for multiple months. But, after 6 months, it might be hard to get to them. If you do 45 minutes, 5 days a week, yeah, you keep them for maybe a couple months before it starts to get really hard. The good news is if you go on even a day-long retreat, they'll come back. Having reached a point where, yeah, they weren't happening very often in my morning sitting, I go on a day long. First sitting, yeah, no jhana. Second sitting, they're back, and they're back every sitting after that. So it's how well do you know them, and how good is your daily practice? That's if you want to take it home.
So the next question, does the breath actually stop? So I think this is pointing to, I can't remember if you've actually said that in this interview, but yeah, so I think the question is about, in jhana, on a certain level of jhana, it's sometimes said that the breath stops. And
Yeah.
this question, does it? And in which jhana or to what extent does it?
There are suttas that indicate the breath stops in the fourth jhana, but most people who don't breathe are called dead. So I don't think it stops, but it gets subtle. A number of people have reported when they get to access concentration, their breath is so subtle they cannot tell what's going on. And I say, well, can you tell whether it's an in-breath or an out-breath, even if you don't know how you know? Yes. So they can continue to follow the breath by simply knowing whether it's in or out. But it can get even more subtle than that, where they can't even tell whether it's in or an out. At which point I say, all right, go to the pamoja, find the pleasant sensation and focus on it. In some of the suttas, it says in the fourth jhana that the breath stops. I think this is a misunderstanding of, I believe it's AN 10.72, entitled Thorns. And it says that in the fourth jhana, breath is a thorn for the fourth jhana. And people have misinterpreted that to mean that if the breath is there, you're not in the fourth jhana. It also says that the sight of a woman is a thorn in a monk's celibacy. Now, this doesn't mean that if a monk sees a woman, he's no longer celibate, right? It's just a thing that can disrupt. The thorn in the first jhana is noise. Yeah, try to get to the jhanas in a noisy environment. It's quite difficult compared to a quieter environment. The thinking coming back in the second jhana and taking over, yeah, that's a thorn in the second jhana. The piti coming back in the third jhana, yeah, that's a thorn in the third jhana. Both of those will knock you out, or not being able to get rid of it, or becoming unstable. The breath becoming noticeable in the fourth jhana can knock you out of it. But I think you keep breathing, just simply because of the physiology. If you don't breathe for more than a couple of minutes, you're going to pass out, and that's just not happening. So I'm not buying it, even though it says that in some of the suttas. But it says a lot of strange things in the suttas, so I'm not buying everything just because it's in a sutta.
No, I appreciate the conversation, Leigh, because, we both come from, I feel like American Buddhism right now there's these really interesting lines that we're holding tension between the esoteric side that sort of does believe in rebirth and more, and certainly we as monastics fall in that realm, and also the more secular Buddhist side, where this is seen as something a bit more foreign to what our own experience is, and looked at with a bit more skepticism. And another issue is exactly like, how deep is jhana and what constitutes it? And it is interesting hearing you speak about the fourth jhana, breath stopping. Is, I know Ajahn Thanissaro really notes that breath stopping as kind of a important landmark, because it does allow us to kind of fix a point on which the fourth jhana aligns across traditions. And some of the states you're speaking to seem to be, I can't say to exactly what each teacher is talking about with that moment in fourth jhana, but just to acknowledge, like, this is one of the dynamics, I think, in this interview, which I value the chance to actually speak to someone who's so, experienced and respectful in the discussion. And we have one more discussion or question from a supporter nearby who you do know, Jason Bartlett. Leigh, what seems to be the best ways you have found to encourage people to work with jhanas in service of liberating insight, instead of fixating on the jhanas themselves as the reason for practice?
Yeah, on a retreat, once somebody is showing signs that they actually have the fourth jhana well in hand, at the end of the interview, I tell them, okay, so what insight practice are you going to do after the fourth jhana? And I give them some options, because I've talked about a number during the retreat, or if they've, gotten there early in the retreat, they have enough background. And so I get them to tell me, and then I say, okay, next interview, I want to hear about your insight practice. In other words, I just say, you've got to go do insight practice. This was what worked with me. I found the jhanas, and finally, when I meditated, I had something I could enjoy, something to do. I liked being there. And Ayya Khema let me basically play with them for a year. Between the first retreat where I learned 2, 3, 4, 5, I already had one well in hand, not knowing what it was. So for the next year, I played with 2, 3, 4, 5. That was it. No insight practice at all. And then at the next retreat, I learned 6, 7, 8. And she let me play with those for about 10 days, 2 weeks. It was a 5.5-week retreat. So fairly early on, I come to an interview and she says, okay, now you've got to start doing insight practice after the jhanas. And I said, but it takes me so long to go all the way up to 8 and come back down. And she said, do them faster. Oh, and you don't have to go all the way up to 8. Just step out of the highest one. Yes, ma'am. I came up with somebody that you did not want to argue with. Yes, ma'am, I'll go do that. And I was completely blown away by the insights I got. I mean, the number of insights I got in the remaining, 3 weeks of that course was 10, 20 times as many insights as I gotten in the previous 6 years. When I came back from that retreat, my friends could see I was different. It was life-changing insights. So the way to get people to not just play in the jhanas on a retreat is to tell them, now you have to go do insight practice. I want to hear about your insight practice next time. And that works for almost everyone. Occasionally somebody comes back and they're not behaving and they're still playing with the jhanas. And so I have to reiterate it. But yeah, the key is, just tell people this is what it's all about. When I describe the jhanas, I go through the 4 jhanas, and then I describe the step in the gradual training that comes after, which is the insight step. And then I talk about how the jhanas make it possible to do these insight steps much more efficiently. You have the indistractibility, and you also have a concentrated, clear, sharp, bright, malleable, wieldy mind that's given to imperturbability. And in the process of stepping through the jhanas, you have decreased your ego functioning, your ego creation much, such that you're now looking at the world from a less egocentric perspective. And that gives you a far better chance of seeing what's really going on. Because normally we look at the world, is this something I want to get? Is this something I had to push away? I am at the center of it all. The world is not like I at the center of it all.
Leigh, thank you. We've really appreciated the chance to talk, and we've covered some real ground. So we are going to move on to Zoom. For those who are interested, we're pasting the link into the chat, and if you don't see it there, you can find it on clearmountainmonastery.org. Down the page is the Wednesday evening meetings, and the link is there. Leigh will be joining us, and just to say, Leigh, if you ever come up by Seattle, we hope you'll come and say hello as well.
Oh, definitely. I'll get Kate to bring me by.
That would be great. All right. Take care, Leigh.
Yeah.
See you in Zoom.